There's a version of this story that gets repeated constantly online. In 1986, China spent millions of dollars flying 11 zoo-born horses halfway around the world, dumped them into a frozen, lifeless desert. No food, no water. Every expert who saw it happen was certain those horses would be dead within days. It's a great story. It's also, as far as I can tell, mostly exaggerated. So I decided to actually find out what happened to those 11 horses. And the real version turned out to be more impressive than the dramatized one. Not less. Here's where it actually starts. Long ago, there was a species called the Przewalski's horse, the last truly wild horse left on the planet. Never domesticated. Evolved entirely on its own terms across the deserts of Central Asia. Then it disappeared. Hunting and habitat loss wiped it out completely in the wild. Not endangered. Gone. The only ones left existed in zoos, scattered across a handful of countries, all descended from a tiny founding population. Years later, a conservation group in the Netherlands did something that doesn't usually make it into the viral version of this story. They didn't just talk about saving the species. They called for it to be sent home. China responded. A dedicated research center went up in Xinjiang, right at the edge of the Yungar Basin, the kind of harsh, remote terrain this species had evolved to survive in. Then, finally, the first 11 horses arrived, flown in from zoos in the UK and Germany. This is where most videos jump straight to the desert and the freezing winds and the countdown to disaster. Here's where it gets strange, though. That's not actually what happened next. These horses weren't released into open wilderness on day one. They were placed into a semi-wild enclosure, monitored, controlled, designed to simulate the terrain they'd eventually need to survive in, without the immediate life or death stakes. For months, researchers watched, adjusted, let the horses slowly adapt. Not a dramatic moment. Careful, patient science. And that's exactly why this program didn't collapse the way so many rushed reintroduction efforts have. Except, that wasn't even the biggest breakthrough. Years into the program, something happened that everyone involved had been quietly waiting for. After all that preparation, all that patience, a tiny foal took its first steps on land where its entire species had once vanished forever. They named him Zunger No. 1. It sounds like a small detail. It wasn't. It was proof, for the first time, that this population could not just survive here, but actually reproduce here. Generation after generation. Without human hands keeping them alive. That's the moment this stopped being an experiment and started being a slow, uncertain success. But here's the question I couldn't stop thinking about while researching this. If the process was really this careful, this scientific, why does the internet keep telling the desert dumping version instead? Why do so many videos claim these horses were left with nothing? Watched by film crews who supposedly packed up early, convinced it was a disaster? I couldn't find a credible source for most of those details. Not the exact sums of money people claim were spent. Not the story about a crew leaving after 2 days. Those details show up in video after video, copied and repeated, but none of them trace back to anything documented. And that's usually a sign of one thing. The true story wasn't dramatic enough on its own. So somewhere along the way, someone added the missing tension. Except the true story never needed it. Because what actually happened over the following decades is, honestly, more impressive than a survival tale. This wasn't 11 horses beating the odds through sheer endurance in one brutal winter. This was an international collaboration. Dutch conservationists, Chinese researchers, decades of monitoring, careful population management, and generation after generation of horses slowly reclaiming land their ancestors had been erased from. Today, that number isn't 11 anymore. It's over 900. Roughly 1/3 of this species' entire global population now lives in and around the land those first 11 horses were brought back to. Not because of one dramatic year. Because of a program that kept going, quietly, for decades. Long after most viral stories about it had already been forgotten. So when people ask how 11 horses did what millions of dollars in scattered conservation efforts couldn't, that's the real answer. It wasn't about the size of a budget. It was about consistency. A program that didn't need a dramatic origin story, because it was never designed for drama in the first place. It was designed to last. And it has. For nearly 4 decades now. Which leaves one question I genuinely don't know the answer to. This species came back from 11 horses in captivity to nearly 1,000 in the wild. That part is documented. That part is real. But full genetic diversity, real long-term resilience against disease, against climate shifts, that's a different, much longer battle. 900 horses, all descended from the same small founding group decades ago. So here's the real question. Do you think that's enough to carry an entire species safely